Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our Palantir Presents webinar series. My name is Sarah Nelson, and I am the Global Sales Coordinator for Palantir, located in our Houston office. Today, I have with me Matthew Lee. He is located in our Calgary office, and he will also be our presenter for today. Now, before we start, I'd like to ask if anyone has any problems hearing or seeing, feel free to leave a comment in our chat box below, and we will be able to try to fix that for you. I also want to let you know that this session is being recorded. Okay. Now, if anybody doesn't have any problems hearing or seeing, I would like to give you a short synopsis of today's presentation. As you know, it is rig scheduling for fun and profit with PalantirRESOURCE. Rig scheduling is where rubber meets the road when it comes to asset planning. All of the high-level decision constraints need to be expressed with precise timings in order to allocate resources into the final development plan. Quite often, detailed rig scheduling is left late in the planning stages, even though some of the technical requirements need to be expressed in early economic models. And this Palantir Presents webinar, Consulting Analyst Matthew Lee will cover aspects of rig scheduling as they pertain to asset planning. He will outline the different roles rig scheduling has in economic and operational planning and the information requirements for creating an effective plan in each area. Short-term and long-term models will be considered, highlighting the balance between complexity and planning efforts. Models that incorporate spatial decisions, like minimizing rig travel distance, will also be discussed. Throughout this presentation, the asset modeling application PalantirRESOURCE will be used to describe the model components needed to perform decision calculations. Matthew Lee is a consulting analyst with Palantir Solutions and has 2 Bachelor of Science degrees, one in industrial engineering and the other in mathematics. He is an expert in decision support systems and uses PalantirRESOURCE to create effective and value-driven development plans. Some of his most recent work has been focused on developing customized rig scheduling solutions for various Palantir clients. So, without further ado, I'd like to turn this presentation over to Matthew Lee.
Hi everyone, thank you for attending this presentation. I'm excited to talk with you about rig scheduling for fun and profit. I know the title might sound a little silly, but I've got a good reason for this. At the heart of rig scheduling, there are really interesting and challenging problems that can be solved. But a lot of times they're buried under monotonous data entry and slow-moving analysis processes. So hopefully with this presentation, I can show to you that there are a lot of valuable best practices you can put into your modeling efforts, and how when we sweep away the boring and the hard and the unnecessarily difficult, we actually have a really fun job to do when it comes to planning. Here at Palantir, I will be showing you PalantirRESOURCE. This is our asset modeling platform, and specifically in solutions towards integrated dynamic planning and field development. So why is rig scheduling difficult? One of the first things that I found when I was researching rig scheduling, and it's difficult to align the assumptions in economic planning and aligning those with operational plans. One of the biggest factors is just with the time scale. Economic planning will look at a project from early phases to late phases over decades. However, operational planning usually just focuses on small time windows and with precise budgets. The other difficulty is requirements for details and accuracy increase significantly also as you go from the economic space to the operational space. This is especially true when dealing with unconventional plays, as not only do you now have more complicated wells with technical drilling and also completion plans that follow, but also with the increased number of wells that you need to drill to fully produce these plays. So we have complicated projects that even just scale up in numbers. There's no easy software solution for this problem. If there was, I wouldn't be talking with you today. You're always in the models going to be trading off between speed and accuracy. The amount of time it takes to build a model and solve versus the amount of detail that you can put into making this model reflect reality as much as possible. The last problem that I find in rig scheduling is and I'm going to pick on Excel a bit, is that these are manual models and they resist experimentation and scenario analysis. Excel is a great tool. It's good for as a data source. It's great for prototyping, but the generality of the program really hurts you. There's no design process for data loading, and there's no design processes for saving result sets and then comparing and contrasting different scenarios when you create them. Sure, there's add-ins, but that doesn't really get at the root of the problem and be able to do it really well from the beginning. So where's the fun and profit? The fun is where you break down the barriers towards agile planning and model transparency. So I'm talking about faster planning cycles and ability to react to changing conditions. The fun, especially when it comes to model transparency, also helps you with training. And when you have new people coming onto a project, your model is a lot easier to understand and it does not take a lot of time to come up to speed. The other thing with model transparency is that it's now portable. Your model is portable and it can solve problems for other people. You can move it between different assets, and all you need is a quick data change and reset of some parameters, and you should be able to be off and running at the same speed in a completely different environment. Where you profit from these is capitalizing on these best practices so you can focus on exploring the planning problem that you have in front of you and finding solutions and plans that exceed minimum requirements. So when you have the time to experiment, you can develop scenarios and you can interrogate your model and find interesting inflection points, and you can find strategically significant improvements to asset infrastructures. You're not dealing with slight modifications to a schedule to gain a couple percent in your net present value. We're talking about really large scale decisions that make sense to a human and can really affect how complicated your model is going forward. So to explore this topic, we will discuss two areas of fun. One is the rig modeling requirements at different company levels. I'll be looking at three: at the corporate level, at the asset level, and at the operational level. We also will talk about the foundational requirements of a rig model. So I'll be talking about what I've found to be the necessary and minimum amount of information that will create an excellent model. And finally, we will talk about how we can profit from this whole process, primarily with limiting economic risk by using project management, by leveraging project management skills, and also by doing some it looks simple, but that's just the beauty of the process. We'll do a simple bottleneck analysis and be able to see how a couple of different decisions can really, really improve the clarity of your model, of planning, and also the value of the project. Rig scheduling is seen quite differently throughout the different levels of the company. At the corporate level, they favor finance metrics and value easy communication and transparency that way. They focus on portfolio decisions. They're dealing with annual basis decisions and the cash flow metrics. One of the decisions that they may make is overall rig allocations. They'll have competing assets that are competing for budgets, that might be competing for rigs, and so they want to set, how can I manage all these high-level decisions among these competing assets? One of the common workflows we do here in Palantir is build out field development scenarios in PalantirRESOURCE and then export those scenarios into Palantir Plan, which is our corporate strategy analysis tool. And so that's where we can reflect all the appropriate corporate KPIs and allow those corporate teams to do this rig allocation. At the asset level, we really have the meat of the problem. This is going to be looking at the asset with a very technical focus, usually on monthly granularity, and for the entire life of the project, which can be, many decades. When you're designing an asset, you're dealing with the geology and how that interacts with surface investments such as pipelines and facilities, and how those different sizes may overall affect the value of the plan. And finally, we have operational teams who need to communicate with precise dates for contracted resources, to develop the asset plans. So we're talking about plans with daily granularity, so we can be very clear on when we expect things to start and finish. And the scope of the plan is usually just a few years, incorporating historical performance from wells when having to deal with the short-term technical constraints, and perhaps some rolling planning windows in case there is a major development in infrastructure, let's say an increased pipeline commitment that they meet. So that next year is very important in figuring out what we need to do for the current year. So what are the necessary ingredients for a great model? I find that modeling is always best performed in an Occam razors environment. And that principle states that among competing hypotheses, the one with the fewest assumptions should be selected. So how you go about figuring out what the fewest assumptions are, you ask yourself the question, what does my customer need out of the model? And the customer could be who you're reporting to, or even the next person down the chain in terms of what the data requirements they need in order to make their set of decisions. Out of that, then you can then decide what are the fewest number of features in my model that I need to accomplish this goal. One of the techniques I take with building my models is starting off with almost embarrassingly few modeling assumptions, just to get the basics right, and iteratively add a feature after feature, validating each step. And as I go along, I'll be able to see, hey, was that last change necessary? What kind of interesting things did that happen when I added that in? Or was the change really incremental, and the difficulty in how long it takes to solve that problem versus the outcome may have been fewer percent than I really care about, and I really value the speed and the clarity of the model. So what do we start with for rig scheduling? Primarily duration of activities. We're talking about the number of days it takes to do drilling, perhaps the number of days to do completion or fracking afterwards. While these activities are quite expensive, they can be managed at a very high level, and not only is the expense a driving factor in decisions, but is also the time it takes. So it's kind of a time equals money kind of thing here, where we want to both reduce those and be able to manage those effectively as possible. You may also have to model construction activities if you're doing pad developments. And whenever any of these activities are taking place, you need to be aware of any windows of time where activities are not permitted. So there may be a seasonal restriction, weather restrictions, permits, lease timings. All these things may decrease the value of a project because you have to wait, for spring breakup. You can't do value-driven activities at that point, but you need to define those very early on so you can be aware of them and be able to prepare for the eventual for any accidents that may happen when your activities get into that area. Resource is very good at handling these kind of things, and we have specific features which we call milestones. They are constraints that'll do the trade-offs between, hey, I've got a deadline coming up, let's say a lease is about to expire. It will accelerate the necessary activities to allow that to be produced, or decide that it's not worth your time and you're just going to let that expire. Quite often that we don't have the right data right now, and it is very useful to use secondary historical assumptions. I'm sure you've used the idea of an analog in the past to do some plannings, and this is all very useful, especially in exploration. Perhaps you can find some sort of similar play and then use that to generate your estimates, perhaps for drilling times or drilling costs or something like that. Why it's not a problem is because your model is easy to update data and improve data. So we have a well-built model. We're going to swap in these new assumptions in and out, which really keeps everything green and keeps everything iterative and everything fresh. The other part of model building that keeps that possible is keeping your data and the logic separate, and you don't get the two intertangled. You don't have to hunt through all the different locations and space inside your model to figure out, oh, where did I set the parameter of that? I can't find that. Keep it separate, and it keeps it transparent. So those are the things that you need to put into a model, but what do you expect out of it? And for rig scheduling, it seems rather simple, but they're very powerful, and that's the start dates and resource assignments. You can go a very long way with just a set of start dates for wells or for their rigs or for the completions or for whatever kind of support activity you've got going on. From those start dates and resource assignments, you can also do very cool things with the well sequences. So we have models in resource that will be able to allocate which rig is drilling which wells, and you can come up with the sequence of which that rig will do. And what you can do in that is actually maybe turn up the granularity of your model. Instead of from a daily, you can go from a monthly, which allows you to model much more time because it is a reduced problem space going from 20 years versus 20 times 365 days. But when you have that sequence, you can take the first start date and actually back calculate the cascading start dates for that rig and the projects it's going to be working on. When you have the resource assignments and the start dates, you can easily integrate that into an economic model. Our workflows here at Palantir, we frequently go from resource into CacheX, our asset planning tool, and we give it the start dates and the field production profiles, and it just goes on and creates your excellent economic models that take taxes and things into consideration. As outputs as well, you also have an opportunity to model geographic issues like rig travel time and cost. Just like the amount of time it takes for a rig to perform an activity, it's also a time equals money relationship with moving that rig around the field. And there are independent ways that you can do to minimize that. A couple of things you can do is use minimum spanning trees to design a road network that decreases the amount of not only the road construction, but how far each rig needs to travel. And then from that, you can then use a vehicle routing problem, the same kind of solution that you'll find FedEx and UPS using to say, hey, I've got all these trucks, or in our cases, rigs. We've got this set of packages that we need to deliver by specific dates, and it will go in and not only plan the route, but allocate the different packages or wells to each of the rigs available. One of the things that makes the geographic modeling a little difficult is the whole adding the time space to the 2D, the X, Y. It really blows up the amount of the optionality and the number of decisions in the model. And what can also harm with that is the complexity or the detail in your wells. So if you have estimated well NPVs that are quite different, you may find that it is technically worth your time to follow those in order of most profitable to least profitable, even though the rig will be bouncing around all over the place. So if that really doesn't make sense for an organization, what you just do is take the average of all those wells, make them quite similar, and then you can apply these spanning tree and vehicle routing problems to deal with your operational needs, to make things simple and to make things more amenable to development. Geographic issues are definitely worth your time to investigate and should be done. It's kind of fun problem. Fun leads to profit. With these good foundations and an agile attitude, we can take a model and sail on a journey of profitable discovery. I'm being a little silly with that, but realistically, it means that with rig scheduling, we can prevent lost profit through the excellent management of risk in your assets and risk in your scheduling. So what do we want to do? Do we want to make the decision, or do we want to be able to explore a problem deep enough that we can actually avoid bad decisions and limit our risk? So first step in managing asset risk is to do your best to manage the drilling and surfeit decisions at the same time. Make them in concert. Make a model that encapsulates as much of what's going on as possible. So with the surfeit decisions, these are the facilities, these are the pipelines, these are when they come online and when we have different upgrades. If you don't have a complete systems models taking everything from well to market, you will lose out on seeing what the consequences of different particular decisions like these upgrades or the well allocations. Even drilling times, you may find that with you're actually bottlenecked with rigs and you cannot meet your requirements. So what we mean is bottleneck is it's kind of a manufacturing term, but it represents the opportunity to increase project value. So if we are limited by the number of rigs, if we increase those number of rigs, our project NPV will go up. However, there's a couple of things that you need to watch out for. There's usually only one bottleneck, and if you are incorrectly trying to fix a problem that is not actually a bottleneck, that will decrease value. So in the case that you are facility limited, but you think that adding more rigs will accelerate your development program, this actually won't do anything. You'll have all these extra rigs and you'll see lower utilization rates as a result. So you can burn cash by not burn cash, meaning to have lower project value by not increasing appropriate bottlenecks, but you can also do it by putting extra resources where it really wasn't required. And then you can manage schedule risk. So after you've done your planning, you have your descriptive model, leverage best practice in project management. So these are your Gantt charts and your dependencies and all the things that you can do to keep those rigs on time. One of the important parts of that is identifying critical project paths. So when a critical path is the path in which you find a delay, it will affect and delay the entire rest of the project. So when you see those paths, you can say, hey, this is a higher risk for delay. We need to create a plan. What happens if we're 10 days, 2 weeks, a whole month out of schedule? What we can do? What can we do to alleviate that, or at least be aware, and then maybe make a value judgment and say, hey, we need to put more resources to make sure we don't fall into that bad area. The other thing you can do with these great schedules is use them to coordinate support activities and supply chains. Especially with fracking, there is a lot of consumables and there's a lot of secondary support that you need to hire and things. So they may not be the most expensive or the most costly part of the development, but they certainly can impact the critical path. If you don't have the right amount of pipe or the right amount of fluid at the right time, that will cause a delay. So if you have these very specific plans, you go ahead and communicate that with the rest of the team, with these supply chains, and you can have hard dates and good realization of, hey, I need this stuff at this time, or you're gonna cost me money. So I have a model that I'm going to show you that goes through a couple of these different rig scheduling type problems at the various level. I have an asset here in Alberta that produces both gas and NGL. There are pipeline commitments for the gas and NGL, and the company is expecting to ramp up their commitments in order to better execute their plan. And one of the assumptions going into this is not only do they have to meet these pipeline commitments for the 5 years, but we also have 15 rigs available to develop the plan. So we will jump into resource. And so I've already optimized this first model. You can see here its assumptions is all these here are my constraints. I have a rig limit. I can't exceed 15. And I have several constraints that help manage the facility or the pipelines in this case. And then 2 constraints in which force us to have or deliver the exact amount of gas and NGL to the different pipelines. One of the things this model includes is a field level curtailment model, which allows us to not simulate, but take into effect what you might do to drill early but shut in the well and save it for later. So what we'll see in the plot of the gases, I'll just hide this a little bit. So here we've got from 2015 to 2020, and you can see that the capacity is increasing according to their corporate plan. And everything looks fine. Hey, we've met all our targets. You can see the blue areas is the saved gas from shut-in wells that we then sell to the market. However, as we expand out in time, what we notice is after I stop enforcing those constraints, we see production falls off dramatically. And so why might that be? We switch over to the liquids chart. We can actually see the results of forcing the model to make sure that we have enough capacity. We have completely overproduced on the liquids. And in this model, the liquids at about $40 a barrel is the value driver of the model. So we have a tremendous amount of behind pipe capacity that takes actually about 4 years. There's a 4-year gap where we don't need to do a drilling because we have so much of this NGL inventory. So we can see right here that we have a bottleneck. The gas, we have to create that, but we have so much excess capacity that somehow this gas is bottlenecking the project. And we can see that with our rig counts too. If everything was fully utilized, you'd see all these bars all the way up at the 15 level. But you can see the gap between 2020 and 2024, we're not doing anything. So just to put some metrics on this problem, this particular plan in our software is worth $4,069 million USD, and it has a DPI, a discounted profit index, of about 1.99. So we're going to address this bottleneck, and we're actually going to assume that we can replan our gas commitments and then so throw that away. Let's assume that we can fix that or reduce it and do in some sort of productive way. So we're going to turn that contract commitment for the gas off and rerun the optimization to see what kind of schedule comes up with. So this model here is exploring the problem of rig scheduling kind of at the corporate level. The drilling requirements are all specified at the well level as indicator variables, and those are managed with the simple rig count constraint of 15. So our model has optimized, and we'll go back to the gas, and we can see that now that we don't have to meet that constraint, there's quite a bit of extra space in this capacity. We could delay, let's say, joining the pipeline for probably 2 years and decrease the overall capacity and the amount of gas we deliver probably about by 25%. Over here on the liquids chart, we can see that we now are there's no gaps. We don't have a giant amount of behind pipe capacity. And what that means is that we didn't have to overbuild or overspend on capital in the early years to make sure that gas constraint was fulfilled. We can flip over to the drilling chart, and we can see that before it was a project value of 4,069. We've now increased that value to 4,107 just by getting rid of the gas constraint and being able to spread out our capex more efficiently. And we can see that with the DPI indicator of 2.05. So that's jumped up. Higher is better. So this is the corporate level. It's not treating things kind of realistically. We can put an extra layer of modeling in there to try and smooth out this rig chart. So there's lots of gaps and lots of empty space, which would represent low utilization. So 15 rigs perhaps isn't necessary to meet all these constraints. So we'll jump into the second model. And so in this one, you'll see the difference is we now have this rig component. And with this rig component, I've decided that it will schedule itself. So we now have a model that automatically schedules rig capacity. And it does it, and it does it by, so rigs have daily rates. And so I've decided to offload all of that daily operational cost as a one-time payment at the beginning of the year. So basically the rig costs a lot right up front, but then the well costs become much less. And so then the optimizer will know, hey, I've got a rig available. Let's pile as many wells into this because the wells are a lot cheaper now. And so what we can see is now, instead of that really bumpy line here, we now have very smooth rig allocation. And there's only one little dip which says right here in around 2022, probably as wells start declining to a point, there was a little bit of underutilization. So this looks a lot better and probably would be very excellent for an asset plan. And we can see that the project value is somewhere in between. We've now got 4,049 million USD, and our DPI is a little bit lower at 2.03, but we can see that it's done quite a bit better. Contract commitment. What we can see is actually when we will re-optimize or de-optimize, we'll run it in the case that we saw before and see how enforcing that gas constraint, even with this automatic rig capacity model, will decrease the value. So I haven't showed you too much about how resource works. After this finishes model, we'll open up a couple of the components, and these are the building blocks that I was discussing earlier, where you have your base components, which have your drilling indicators and have your completion indicators and all the basic data. And these small components are the defined processes in which you can quickly swap out data and even have those portable models. I've got these wells, but they could be anybody's wells as long as you've got a type curve and a capital budget that goes with them. It'll figure out that problem. So here we go with actually the original corporate solutions with the rig involved, and we can see we have a quite similar answer, that we've got that big gap between 2020 and 2024. Well, we've got a much nicer looking rig plan. But we've definitely lost value. We're now at the 3,983 million US dollars, and our DPI 1.96 because we're not utilizing our capital effectively. And then finally, we have the operational models, and these ones are a lot different in that we were talking about those small windows. And so I've got a couple examples here. The first one is what our plan might look like for just a small amount of time, but when we have these rig minimization or rig travel minimization constraints involved. So in this little map here, which I've got somewhere near Grand Prairie where our original story was, I'll just hide this for a sec. Give me a second here. Open that map back. Oops, map back up. So here's all our well locations. There's 96 of them, and the plan is to have 9 rigs that execute this plan. So we've got a little map interface here that can actually play out in time how everything is developed. So we'll just skip along here, and you'll see as wells are developed, they turn into derricks. And in this model, the travel path actually has been minimized, and that's how your play would look. Zoot. So that's kind of fun. This is, you might see the icon changing. These are some new features that we have in the 15.2 release in resource that's currently in developed. We're doing a big focus on rig scheduling and resource management, and so look ahead for some really great new tools that we're allowed to offer in this environment. This other model is operational model, but this is dealing with just the yearly scales and how one might manage rigs and completions in succession. So I will open up a well, simply here to show you what a component looks like. And basically it's composed of 2 essential elements, or 3 essential elements. One is the property that says when the drilling is occurring, and another one that says when the completion is occurring. And the third one is the NPV of the well itself. So because the way NPV works, you can actually take the NPV of NPVs and end up with the same value. So I can cut the size of these wells instead of from 25, I can model them precisely even in only a couple of months because of that mathematical relationship. So back over here in the analysis tab, we can see that in this model, I have completions that need to be scheduled right after drilling. And while that may seem a little bit inflexible, we can actually see that the utilization rates in this model are quite high. 100% in the beginning, and only ever getting as low as 80 and 90, 88 in that case, and 85 in the other case. And in the bottom chart, you can see that I have both the resources that are available, and you'll see little dips where there's a couple of days between transitions between wells in which the utilization drops a little bit. So this utilization fell for about just a little bit between 1 and 2 weeks, but overall is quite high. So even though you're making a pretty broad assumption of that things must follow exactly, you'll actually end up with, the appropriate size. You'll have an appropriate sized amount of resources to develop this field, which will prevent low utilization and everything else. So those are all the models I have to show for you today. We'll wrap up. So where's that fun and profit again? You get fun when you can study the requirements of each company level that reveals a useful set of rules that everyone can apply to this model. So that for me in developing this presentation was coming up with that rig component that you saw in the second model. I was always looking at my drilling and it was always very spiky and it didn't look good for a human. But I was able to come up with, when I was researching in the operational parts, is that if you're not using a rig, it still costs you money. So I was able to develop this component in a way that it actually was able to work both at the low level and all the way up to the corporate level, thereby giving my corporate team or the corporate requirements a way to, have a better, more realistic model with with excellent results. The other fun part is with the proper tools, increased model size and complexity can be easily managed. In the corporate and the asset models that you saw me use, in less than a minute, I was scheduling 725 wells, obeying 2 different commitments for strategic pipeline contracts, and at the same time creating a high-level operations plans for almost 20 years in duration. That's huge, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of what a proper tool like PalantirRESOURCE can do to manage model size and complexity. When you have all this, you definitely will profit. You will have a flexible model, scenarios, and being able to evaluate alternatives very easily, allowing the modeler to examine more opportunities and assess the implications of decision strategies. So with this set of tools and workflows and best practices, real decision modeling is awesome. And that means that LNG option that you might think down the road that will require a huge amount of commitment, that won't require tarot cards. You'll have a scientific planning process that can define risk and revenues in very tangible ways. All right, that is the end of my presentation. It is now question time. Sarah, if you could help moderate the questions, I'll be happy to answer anything that anybody may have.
Okay, great. I do have the first question here. Let's see. How can you model delays between activities?
That's a great question. So you just saw in the operational model that I was linking up rig scheduling and the rigs and the completion back to back. And that might not be realistic or even in the real world. Hey, let's just, our completions crew isn't available for a couple of days. Let's fit that into the model. But what that does it introduces a decision of, well, how long can I wait between these activities? And so that'll cause an explosion in the amount of possibilities. Do I wait 1 day? Do I wait 2 days? Do I wait 3 days? And that's coupled with when does the well start, which is coupled with, I've got 100 wells to deal with. So that's kind of difficult. Resource does have ability to do that. We have a double milestone feature that allows you to compare the start dates of 2 components, or the end date of the first component and the start date of the next, and you're allowed, and it allows you to model that waiting time. But one of the downsides of it is that's one of those overnight kind of models, where because of we have very few constraints and we're modeling everything very low level, it takes a long time to get through that process. It's a very beautiful looking model, a very elegant, but it has that speed accuracy trade-off.
Okay, thanks. And if anyone else has a question, feel free to enter it into the question portion. It's going to be the third one from the bottom. Looks like we do have another question as well. What part of the Palantir software suite was the map view in? Can you walk through a couple of other uses of the map view?
Sure, I can absolutely do that. I'll just flip over to the map view and talk over a couple of things that we can do. So yeah, this is the map view, and it is in PalantirRESOURCE. You can see we got a little zooming in action kind of go. And it's fairly flexible in what you can describe. There's no... it doesn't help you decide things, but it is a descriptive aspect of the model. So we've got component icons that show where in space, latitudes and longitudes, where things are. And we've got these features that cue in the change of icons based on the date. The other things you can do with the map is actually layer in shapefiles. So if you've got your GIS team that has boundaries and different graphics, and you can even pre-draw in the roads, have those overlay on top of this. So yeah, those are the features. You can, very descriptive, shows you where and when things show up in your profile. We've got this timeline that can express in an evolutionary manner how your project is going, and then you can overlay shapefiles and other geographical information tools or descriptions in order to fully or further communicate your model with people.
Okay, thanks, Matt. That was a great answer. Okay, looks like we have another one here. Can actuals be directly integrated as well to get an economic view of activities that are in progress, or can they only be brought in as updated assumptions?
So yeah, there really isn't any limit to what you can do. So in these models, I was scheduling wells completely in the future. But if you had another component, quite frequently we will design a specific existing well, which will be the aggregate of all the wells that are already in time, and that will be a component that is fixed and there's no decisions on it. But of course, its productions are factored into the constraints and the resulting decisions of all the wells that we have specified of being plannable. So you can do that with wells. You can do that with facilities. They just work just like any other components. Update their data, add and subtract them. So yeah, actuals can be brought into this economic model as these fixed components that don't have any scheduling decisions, but will in fact come through in the calculations for net present of the entire project, and reflect the interaction between components that already exist in the plan and that have no decisions left with them, and things that have to be decided in the future.
So I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. And I would like to let you know that if you do have any questions, feel free to go ahead and send us a message at marketing@palantirsolutions.com. We do have other webinars that are going to be taking place for the next couple of months, so you will see those coming through as well. And you can also view them on our website at palantirsolutions.com. So I would like to thank you, Matthew Lee, for the presentation, and again, thank you everyone for joining.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for joining, everyone. I hope to see you in the future.